Ken Wilber is an American philosopher. You might be most familiar with his work on integral theory, or in particular, his most famous book, The Spectrum of Consciousness. What Wilber was trying to do was basically portray a general underlying theme or set of themes across differing theories. And the basic idea is, if you look at all the different theories and ideas and concepts across all the world, if you take all of that information, you put it on the table, and then you ask, what underlying patterns do I see here? Then you have a general or integral theory of reality. Now, in particular, Wilber took a liking to the concept of the evolution of consciousness. And he's developed very rich and dynamic maps of reality and of the way consciousness develops in human beings. In particular, his basic idea is that all of reality evolves from the geosphere to the biosphere to the noosphere. And now, the concept of the noosphere was popularized by the work of Teilhard de Chardin, a Jesuit philosopher and mystic living towards the early 1900s, so last century. He was most famous for his work in paleontology and in his very famous book, The Phenomenon of Man. Now, Teilhard was trying to do a lot of what Wilber was trying to do. He was trying to create a general theory of evolution. A general theory of evolution which attempted to combine spirit with philosophy, with science, try to say, what is the bigger picture here? And can we create a general map? And so what he found is, if you look through the empirical and biological state of evolution, we have a general trend which he called the law of complexity consciousness, simply meaning the more time evolution goes on, the more complex and aware and sentient it becomes. Now, this sentience reaches a particular point, being able to self-reflect, generated the noosphere, or the sphere of ideas, awareness, and human consciousness. Teilhard basically believed that eventually human beings would evolve this collective consciousness to a point where we would begin to see almost like a collective brain. And if you look far enough back in the picture of evolution, the general pattern of all of life, of all the universe, is to become awakened, for literally evolution to grow a brain, to become conscious and aware of itself. Now, this general trend towards increasing complexity can be mapped out throughout all stages of evolution, the development of the nervous system and the development of the brain in higher animals, and so on and so forth. And what he basically believed is that eventually human beings would generate a collective society, a society without the need necessarily for nations or borders, not in the way he knew them and not in the way we know them today. Instead, men or human beings were part of a trend towards increasing and increasing layers of complexity. Philosophically speaking, we can sort of see this as perhaps what the internet is helping the earth become. Now, of course, the internet is barely an example of what Teilhard was trying to say as sort of a collective, unified humanity. But all of this aside, what Teilhard was basically trying to do was describe that all of reality, from the geosphere to the biosphere to the noosphere, was converging at a single point, a singularity, one might say, an omega point. The noosphere would eventually lead us to this omega point, which philosophically, at least according to more Western traditions, was God. Now, this makes sense from Teilhard's perspective, because what he was trying to portray is that evolution doesn't discard personification. It doesn't discard consciousness. It creates more and more of it. So human beings, being conscious persons, are probably a small example of whatever greater being or whatever greater personification was to come. And in order for us to be being pulled towards something, being pulled toward this omega point, of which all of complexity and evolution was converging towards, this ultimate end point, this omega point, had to be something, a ground of being, but a being nonetheless. Now this differs in particular with Eastern philosophy, as Wilber may see it, in that Wilber's idea of the end or ground of being is more in line with Eastern thought, that is, emptiness or no thingness. But in my perspective, I believe these two things can converge and are equally possible. For instance, the idea of omega point as the generator or the singular point from which all of the cosmos is evolving towards is very similar to more Eastern ideas of emptiness being the ground of being, or emptiness is fullness and fullness is emptiness. Now these two concepts are both capable, Eastern and Western, are both capable of generating a coherent story of creation and destruction, of reality and the ultimate point of reality, the ultimate meaning of reality. Although they differ in that Wilber's theories tend to gravitate more towards the Eastern non-dual emptiness, and Teilhard's theories gravitate towards Western personified omega point, or God. So in the East we have emptiness, in the West we have God. But the two are both coherent patterns and general ideas which seem to complement each other. Whether or not in the future we'll have any better sense of what is really going on, I'm not sure. However, we have two different theories here, and they're both making a lot of sense. So I do recommend checking the both of them out, and I've basically just laid down the overall patterns of which they were talking about and compared them. With Wilber, you get a very dynamic and complicated system. With Teilhard, it may be arguably equally complicated, but it definitely has a more coherent direction. So take your pick, or please read both. They're very interesting, and thank you for listening.